The rich get richer. A flurry of signings over the course of the past week. One team looking a whole lot stronger heading to MLR 2025. We break it all down and talk about its fantasy impact on this episode of the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Fantasy Ruckers Show starts right now.
Where rugby and the world of fantasy sports collide. Welcome to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, talking all things rugby from the MLR to leagues around the world. We're on top of it. Headphones on, pads off. This is the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Now, here are your hosts, Ryan Yee, Matt Yee, and Devin Vanderpool.
What's up, everybody? This is episode 131 of the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Thank you so much to our Fantasy Ruckers League members, our community members, and everyone else tagging along on this journey of making fantasy rugby a reality in the MLR. With you each and every single week, Matt Yee, Ryan Yee here with you to break down all the latest goings on in Major League Rugby and how that will impact the upcoming fantasy MLR season. Vandy, once again, dealing with some family stuff. So again, sending our best wishes to him. He'll be back as soon as possible. But Maddie, it's been a week. We have broke down a whole bunch of stuff last episode when it came to a bunch of signings that came through over the course of the past 7 days. And 7 days later, there's still more signings to talk about. Definitely no shortage of content for us to talk about in terms of what will have an impact here coming up in the 2025 Fantasy MLR season.
I mean, look, earlier start to the season means that we got a more jam-packed offseason. So like we always see, I think we see a lot of moves heading into December, a little break during the holidays, and then it starts back up in January. It looks like this is just getting started a bit earlier with that season starting in February. Or preseason starting in February, I guess. So yeah, I expect to see. I mean, I hope that by the time the holidays come around, we've got a pretty good idea of the teams that are going to be running out for 90% of each roster.
Yeah, and we're going to continue to follow, obviously, the announcements that teams will be making as we get closer and closer to that early 2025 start date.
You know what we're still waiting for, Ryan?
What?
We're still waiting for that big splash.
We are still waiting for the big splash. I mean, I think we've had medium splashes, would you say? Maybe kind of okay splashes in terms of some of the names. Like we've had what's been reassuring for me, right, Maddie? And we'll obviously dive into it, but at least a lot of the signings that happened as of late, especially over the course of the past 2 weeks, is like these are notable guys that have played in notable leagues that are coming to the MLR, which is always encouraging to see.
Yeah, it is. It is encouraging to see. And like I think we're seeing the guys coming from leagues coming into the MLR, but I think what we're waiting for and what we always kind of have at least one or two of them or three of them, honestly, starting in December throughout the year, even into the season, is like, okay, where's this big name? Where's this big name? We got one big name I think so far that we have is the French player. It crossed my mind, but yeah, Galatier. He was the big splash so far for NOLA, but I think we're still waiting for that, the Mananus, the Waisaki Nahalo, the Tavita Kuradrani, those types of signings. I think we're just waiting for that, and I'm hoping that we get to see that this year. It's just a matter of when.
Yes, I could not agree more. Again, on this episode, a jam-packed one here, a nice quick hitter. We're going to go over the latest signings that happened over the course of the past week. There has been one team, at least over the last week, and especially over the past 14 days, that has been extra active. And when you talk about success in the MLR, it's something that they've seen quite frequently here over the course of the past 2 years. And the fact that they're continuing to get stronger and stronger is a scary thought for the rest of the MLR. You could probably guess who we're talking about. Well, we will dive into that, which leads us to the question in terms of fantasy MLR. Does the team that a certain skillful player is playing for increase their value by a substantial amount? So we're going to get into it, and we'll talk a little bit about that, whether or not certain positions are affected more on the teams that they play for, and how you can kind of assess that, especially as we inch closer to the start of the season and try to make these decisions on who's going to make our top five, Maddie, who's going to not make our top five, and more importantly, how that's going to affect where you rank guys in your draft. But it is interesting to talk about it so soon, though, Maddie. I know we're in the full fledged of fantasy football season. Are you going to take solace in the fact that you're probably going to have what, a month or two to kind of really disconnect yourself from fantasy? I know I'm crazy, right? And I'm digesting fantasy all year long, no matter what sport it is. I know the two big ones for you: fantasy football, fantasy MLR. So you'll have a little bit of a break there. Are you going to take advantage of that? But it's not much of it because, like you said, the MLR season is starting earlier, so you're going to have to ramp it up pretty quick.
Yeah, I don't know if there's going to be much for a break. I mean, there's research season here that's starting, right?
That's true.
It's time to get into the thick of things for fantasy MLR.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's get into the thick of this episode. But before we do, like we say each and every single time, if you aren't already, give us a follow at the Fantasy Ruckers. We mentioned last episode we hit the nice big milestone of the 100 subscriber mark on YouTube. So again, big shout out to our supporters, our subscribers, and everyone who's been along this journey of making fantasy rugby a reality in the MLR. We want to continue to grow this thing. So like, subscribe on this video and in our channel. It really goes a long way. Leave us a comment. We love to interact with the people. And again, if you want to take part in fantasy MLR in the 2025 season, you can definitely do so. And you'll be first in the know if you're following us on social, Instagram, X, Facebook, at the Fantasy Ruckers. You'll be able to do that. We got a Discord with a fun community over there that loves to talk fantasy MLR, loves to talk rugby as a whole. There's been, obviously, with a lot of these signs, a lot of back and forth in our Discord chat. And then we also do have the official platform for the Fantasy Ruckers leagues when it comes to fantasy MLR, and that is the fantasyruckers.com that you can check out. Has all the stats from last season, from both a rugby stat format and a fantasy format as well. So definitely want to give that a shout out as well. But Matt, without more further ado, you want to get right into it?
Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. Let's start off with, I think, probably the biggest news from the past weekend or the past week, I should say. And we talked about this guy not too long ago, about a team that has been having a whole bunch of departures, and we weren't quite sure where this guy was going to end up. I think the general consensus was that this guy was probably going to be moving on from the MLR, but it was announced within the last week that Rodney Iona is moving from the NOLA Gold to the Seattle Seawolves, which I think is probably the biggest impact move, especially from a fantasy standpoint, that we have seen maybe so far this offseason even.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw this, I was really interested to understand exactly what this means. I don't think you make a move to sign Rodney Iona unless you have a departure or a gap to fill, and that to me looks exactly like a Mac Mason departure potentially. So yeah, it's hard to say, and they definitely, I know Iona has played center, but they definitely don't need help in the center position,
right?
So yeah, to me this looks like potentially a Mac Mason departure for them, which, you know, I think Rodney Iona has had his ups and downs in this league as a kind of a streaky player, but has definitely shown that potentially within a stable side like Seattle and a structured side like Seattle, he could excel.
So I think for me, right, there's two scenarios in which this can go by. And I guess I'll ask you, Maddie, what your confidence level is for these two scenarios and which you think is more likely happening. The first is what you just mentioned there. Like, we read between the lines a lot of the times with these moves. And oftentimes you can kind of predict that when you're making a big signing like this, the likelihood that there is a counterpart departure that is occurring is often a thing that does happen. So you can't think that Mac Mason is the one that obviously is going to swap out, but you bring Rodney Iona in, which I think is a fantastic signing for the Seawolves. We'll get into the fantasy impact there. But I think then the other scenario is almost like a Houston SaberCats, because we had something very similar that happened last year in terms of AJ Alatimu being the starting guy for the Seattle Seawolves, moving on from Seattle after the signing of Mac Mason and joining the Houston SaberCats. There was kind of rumblings there on, does this mean that Davy Kutzer is going anywhere? What are we going to do here? And they ended up having both of them there, both of them having time at that that fly half position. I know that Davy Kotzer does have the ability to play in that 15 position, which we did see him play quite a bit last year. And AJ Alatimi being able to slot into that fly half position. But again, I think that is definitely a scenario that you can't rule out completely per se. So when it comes to fantasy value, I mean, I think it can be said that if Rodney Iona is the guy in Seattle, he is going to be extremely valuable in terms of the fantasy impact. I mean, I would probably guess after Joel Hodgson, maybe Davy Kutzer, depending if he continues to have the fly half eligibility. In terms of fantasy fly halves off the board, I mean, at least top four, possibly top three for Rodney Iona.
Definitely not top three, but potentially top four, maybe top five. I don't know. I'm a bit hesitant with Iona just because we've seen his ups and downs, and I'm not 100% sold of his success in this league yet.
Okay, so we go down the list. Obviously, Jason Potros is going to be the marquee guy. That's the guy that I named out there. So yeah, maybe not top three, but Jason Potros, Joel Hodgson, assuming he's back with Utah, Davy Kutzer in there, AJ Alatimu if he's returning, probably up there. Again, Davy Kutzer is kind of the weird one there where he's back three and fly half eligible. Does he slot in right there for you? Do you take Echeverry over Iona? He was a guy that was obviously very valuable this season. You think he slots around that space?
Very. I mean, Videla might have a case
That's
this
true.
year because he's
True.
going to be playing a full season there. He didn't play a full season last year. Yeah, it'll be really interesting. And remember, I want to wait because I don't know yet, and I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, potentially, if we think of what it is now, Rodney Iona, I think fits in that spot after maybe the top five, top six type guy.
And just to go over what Rodney did last season, 122.6 fantasy points, missed the middle part of the season between round 9s to round 16, his high being 28.4 in round 4 when he scored a try, added a try assist at the fly out position for the NOLA Gold. Again, kind of what Matthew alluded there is he is a guy that is up and down, has as low games as 6.5 and 8.4, but as high as that 28.4 points. And if you go to the year before, I mean, this was a guy that was pretty electric too. Had as high as a 32.6 fantasy points, also in the round 4 of the 2023 season. So I don't know if he has a thing when it comes to round 4 being a month into the season. But yeah, it should be interesting. It's just, I guess, and we'll get into this conversation a little bit later here. What we alluded to is that how much does changing from the NOLA Gold, who was a team that always had promise, but never kind of lived up to that expectation, to the Seattle Seawolves that are obviously a marquee team coming off of an MLR Shield final. Where does Rodney Iona slot in there? How much more productive does he become being a part of that offense? I guess we'll find out. But again, interesting to see it. Rodney Iona, definitely a guy 2 weeks ago, was a guy that we didn't think was going to be in the MLR, and he finds himself on not only a different team, but a team that again went to the finals against the New England Free Jacks.
Yep, for sure.
All right. Then moving on to, I guess, that NOLA Gold team, we have another departure. And what's interesting, as we talked about it, is that we've seen the signing of Kellyan Galatier from the French league, who played flanker and is signed for the 25-26 season. But outside of that signing, we really haven't seen much from this NOLA Gold team, and it's just been departure after departure after departure. I think what we said last week, it was like 7 in the past couple weeks, make it 8 or 9 now in the past couple weeks. Sebastiano Villani is a guy that's now moving on to a guy that was drafted second overall by the NOLA Gold, I believe, and he's not coming back there either.
Yeah, well, didn't get much playing time. I mean, makes sense. Came off the bench. I wonder if he's moving to the Anthem as well. So we'll see. Being kind of an American grown talent, we'll see if he goes there. But yeah,
Are you expecting a Utah Warriors situation here? Obviously, Utah kind of got it done nice and quick, where one social media post for everyone that's leaving. NOLA went the other way, has done an individual post for each and every single player. Utah was just like, efficiency. We're going to get all these out. And they've been doing signings in blocks where they've announced 4 signings at one time. The last week we went over all of that. Do you think that NOLA is setting themselves up for something here, or has a lot of this been kind of second tier guys that aren't really expected. You're going to have to fill Rodney Iona somehow, I guess, and a bunch of other big names in there as well.
Well,
Augusto Bohm, things like that. Where do you predict this?
I don't know. I mean, you see these guys leave, like Rodney Iona. I don't know. He was out for most of the season. Reese Botha, he did a fairly decent job, honestly, starting at 10. Do they need to replace him? I don't know. Like Rodney Iona wasn't incredible. And if Luke Campbell's back, it's losing Villani. Are you that worried?
Sure.
Probably not. Augusto Bohm, he was kind of the backup, kind of had some starts here and there. They're losing guys for sure, and I'm sure they'll announce some signing soon. But yeah, I don't think they lost the amount of talent that Utah announced all at once.
I mean, you're our in-house Noah Gold guy. Confidence
Well,
higher or lower than it was heading into last season?
I don't know about in-house, but we'll see. We'll have to see what signings they make.
We'll see. All right. And then moving over to the Miami Sharks, a returnee for him, a guy that is going to or had a pretty solid impact for him. Sean McNulty is returning to the Miami Sharks. Made his debut, obviously, in 2021 with the LA Giltinis. He has 56 MLR appearances over that time. MLR runner-up both in 22 and 23. And now he's returning to the Miami Sharks here for the upcoming 2025 season. A guy that was very, very fantasy impactful when it came to the points that he scored in this past season, 83.5 at the front row position, scoring as high as 15.4 in that round 4 matchup when he started at the hooker position, scoring a try, 72 meters gain. McNulty, just been a staple guy in the MLR, USA Eagle, sticks around, staying with the Miami Sharks. Yeah, definitely a key piece for that Sharks team.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what's happening with Kirby Myhill, but he obviously didn't play as much, and McNulty took over that starting role. So good for him. Glad to see him back with the Miami Sharks. He's not doing like every other U.S. eligible player is doing and flocking over to the Anthem. So he's staying in Miami, and yeah, looking forward to seeing him play again.
He's probably one of those like second tier front row guys, right? Like you obviously have your big names at the top. He's probably a guy if you extrapolate his production in 2024, probably a guy that you'll be happy to draft as a starting guy if you do kind of punt on the front row position those early rounds as a later round guy that you can kind of take a flyer on and when he starts he has the potential to go off for you.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, he'll definitely be a guy. I think he'll definitely be drafted. That's for sure.
All right, moving on to the final team that had probably the most movement over the course of the past week, and the team that has titled this episode, that has led to the question that we are going to be asking in this upcoming segment, and that is the New England Free Jacks. We said at the beginning of the show, the rich get richer, and it seems like they're doing just that over the course of the past couple weeks. First, we'll get the re-signings out of the way. Big-time names that are obviously staples of this New England Free Jacks team. Ben Lesage, Leroux Milan, Jed Melvin, and Vian Conradi all returning for the 2025 season. So already there, you're returning a team and 4 caliber guys that have made substantial impacts when it comes to the success of this New England Free Jacks team. Now, they also add 2 more pretty established players when it comes to guys that have international experience. I'm going to butcher this last name, but we'll go for it.
Yes, you
Joan
will.
Koroi Duadua.
Nice try.
Fiji rugby prop that joins from Super Rugby, who played for the Fijian team there. And Sam Caird, a former All Blacks U20 player, played for Northland in the NPC Bunnings. He also joins New England. So 2 guys, kind of your staple New England Free Jacks guys that have experience coming in and joining a team that's already loaded. And like we said at the top of the show, the rich get richer. And this comes after obviously the signings that they announced last year with the signing of Yaro Gomez Vara from the dispersal draft, and also having a bunch of guys returning there when they made the announcement of Quatrin returning and the likes of those players. I mean, this New England team is going to be scary once again.
Yeah, I think what they're doing is bolstering up every kind of position that they have, right? So one, maybe we'll start with the new signings, Fijian prop. I mean, we love Fijian props. I love watching Fijian props play. I'm looking forward to see him play in the MLR. And Sam Caird, I think we're seeing kind of the Ryan Martin Northland ties here, bringing in some Northland players. So A guy with Super Rugby experience is always a guy that you're going to love having in your lineup. And we've seen that be a successful recipe to be successful in this league. They're locking up every position here. They're locking up the front row. They're bringing in back the guys that added to their success. They're adding more talent. They're locking up the engine room, the second row. They're bringing back guys that have contributed to their success and locking in new talent. Back row room, they're doing the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. They're going to have Jed Melvin in for a whole season. We saw how electric he was for them. That's going to be something for them. When you look at that back row room, they lock in their starting 9. I believe they still have the young kid, the Oscar Lennon, still on the roster, who was carried them, I guess, in that, or didn't carry them, but played in that final for them and played well. They got Potros, they got Lesage, they got Leroux Milan, locked up their center room. I think the only one that probably still requires a little reassurance is that back 3. They lose Mitchie Wilson, and we're just going to have to kind of see what exactly and who they're keeping around on that lineup, because I don't believe they've announced yet, and Ryan, correct me wrong, I don't believe if they've announced yet the return of Reese McDonald at this point.
Have not heard anything about Reese McDonald. You're right, though, about the other ones, Quatrin, Potros, Kyle Sakara, John Poland, and Kyle Bailey.
Yeah, they're locking up every position. They're returning guys that are important for their culture and adding talent where they need it and as they can add talent. And they're just going to be they're going to be the favorites going into this next season, regardless of whatever other signings get made. They're going to be the favorites going in. There's nothing that we haven't seen the likes of Seattle, San Diego re-add the players like this, or at least announce it for me to have any other thought to say there's going to be anyone other than New England Free Jacks sitting atop of the table by the end of the year.
Right. And correction there, Josh Larson, club captain for the New England Free Jacks, was among the top 5 signings the previous week here, in addition to their additions here and the another 4 that are here. You're right, Matt. It's just this.
I think where we're really going to, what's really going to make or break this lineup is what back 3 additions they make.
Yeah.
Like what's happening in that back 3. You think about last year, Balakena, not that great. Daniel Morgan, Pudarangi, is he coming back? I don't know. Reese McDonald, obviously a big part. What's he doing? Mitchie Wilson's obviously not returning for them. I think the big thing is going to be who's going to be that Reese McDonald. Is it going to be Reese McDonald? I don't know. Reese McDonald gets named, I think, back of the year from Manawatu. Is he going to get a shot at Super Rugby? Who knows? We'll see. But yeah, I'll be interested to figure out what announcements they make in the coming weeks for that back 3.
Absolutely. I mean, this is what I was going to say, is this is what makes New England, right? And why they've been such a staple in this league, because they just build and build and build, and the stability there, the consistency while having some of these additions is just incredible. And that's why they've won back-to-back championships. That's why they've been successful in this league for so long and been the team to beat for a long time. And it looks like in 2025, that's going to be the case once again. Obviously, Matt, like you said, I think the back 3 will be a interesting storyline going into the season in terms of who fills in for that production and into that starting lineup. But I mean, if you're a New England Free Jacks fan right now, you got to be absolutely ecstatic in terms of the moves that they're making, because you're right, Maddie. It's not like, you're hearing much other things from the teams that are competing around them, right? Like, it's not like you're hearing crazy things about San Diego making these signings. You're not hearing crazy things about the Houston SaberCats making any of these crazy signings.
Even like retention wise,
right?
Like New England Free Jacks are the only team that's announcing all these retained players. A button and the most by far. And I think we saw Scott Matthews say this last year of like, we have the highest retention rate out of the entire MLR. And it's true. And they're doing it 2 years in a row, and they're doing it through their culture. They're doing it through their winning ways. They're doing it through the community that they've built in Quincy, Massachusetts. They are, and I always think about this, is that they are I would say the example of what every MLR team should strive to be.
Absolutely. Coming from top down, right? From the community involvement, from the communication in terms of social media and lineups and things like that for our
Everything,
sake, in terms of
injuries.
it's just, yeah, very, very helpful. Well, that leads us to our next segment here, Maddie. And unless you had any more news and notes in terms of any of your sources saying anything.
I got nothing to break here. I got nothing to break.
All right. Well, this
Oh
made me,
wait,
yeah. Well,
I will say, I believe December comes around. I forget when. I think end of November. Super Rugby squads are going to start being named. Just keep your eye on the bat there. NPC Bunnings Cup season's over. Up the Lions. They won the championship. But yeah, we're gonna start seeing, I think, some Super Rugby rosters coming out in the next, I think, few weeks. Which means that even more catalyst, Ryan, for an even bigger offseason, because we're gonna start finding some names from the MLR on there, or see some names from the MLR left off of there, which is gonna
right.
point to some good things.
And that, I think that's a great point to wrap up this segment in, is that, again, it's that reading between the lines, right? Like, kind of similar to the point that you made about seeing Rodney Iona sign with the Seattle Seawolves and potentially connecting the dots and saying, okay, maybe there's something to be said about Mac Mason possibly not being there. But again, I think when it comes to the MLR and the at times lack of communication when it comes to team rosters, signings, starting lineups, things like that we're all become accustomed to for a brand new league, especially when it comes to fantasy MLR. We as fantasy MLR managers have to do kind of some of the legwork as ourselves. That's why you listen to this show, because we do some of that legwork for you. But it is piecing together that lineup in your head and trying to lay it all out in terms of, okay, here are the guys that they've signed, here are the guys that they've departed with. Okay, here are the guys that didn't make a Super Rugby roster that probably will be returning. Things like that. And again, we're gonna break that down deeper into this offseason, especially when we get closer to the 2025 year, about these lineups and what we predict to be what these squads look like in 2025. But again, to Matthew's point, just gotta start painting that picture, paint that
Yep.
Picasso, and you'll get that starting lineup or that roster that you may predict, which is always fun to do, or not so fun when you when you're trying to make predictions and it comes out and there's these mid-season signings that you have
And
no
we
idea were
stink.
coming. All right, well, let's get into this last segment before we talk about some gambling. Is all these New England Free Jacks signings and all these additions that they had just made me think for a second in terms of, okay, obviously we loved having New England Free Jacks assets when it came to fantasy MLR, right? You can name the list of guys that were just very, very impactful, right? Obviously, Reese McDonald, Jason Putros, Vian Conradi was a top draft pick before he got injured. Ben Lesage was great. Obviously, Wayne Vanderbank was a guy that was on everyone's squad, and we're very happy that they got on that squad. Jed Melvin late in the season was a spectacular pickup and a guy that was impactful for you. It made me ask the question on how much in fantasy MLR, because this varies from sport to sport depending on what fantasy sport you play. How much does the team that a certain skilled player plays for impact their fantasy value? That's the question here. And I think on some sports, it's very, very minimal in terms of the impact. I think of fantasy basketball, where really it's an individual thing. A guy's going to get his points if he's good. A guy's going to get his points. Where you then turn it over to probably the other side of it, fantasy football, where you might have a star wide receiver of some sort, but if he doesn't have a quarterback that's throwing to him, or if he's not on a good offense, that fantasy value is going to take a hit. Now, where does fantasy MLR lay in that spectrum of, does being on a good team and playing in a high value position on that good team automatically equal to fantasy points? So let's go in and dive into whether or not that is the case, and we'll go in. And I think when I went through the numbers, Maddie, and you can jump in here, I started to realize that it is position by position. There are certain positions that are more impacted by how good a team is versus other positions. And you can also make the parallels to fantasy football. Again, a wide receiver is going to be more impacted, or a tight end is going to be more impacted by the offense they're on versus a running back, because the running back is going to get his touches. If it's a skilled running back, he's going to get that. To an extent, obviously, there's a lot of other factors that go into it. Our fantasy football players who listen to this podcast will understand that. But for you, if you had to break it down, when I say that to you, what positions do you think have a big impact when it comes to being on a good team, and then what positions you think are minimal in terms of being on a good team or not?
I think it's the other way around. So for me, there's a position that really, I think, probably benefits the most from being on a good team. And this is only because the front row position is so heavily leaned
Mm-hmm.
towards tries. Now, as a good team, I'm going to spend a lot of time inside your 22. I'm going to draw a lot of penalties from you, and I'm going to put you under pressure and put you in the corner.
Mm-hmm.
When teams put other teams in the corner through penalties and kicking for touch, that's when we see a lot of these guys like Dylan Fawcett, Dewal Kutza,
Mm-hmm.
Andrew Quattrin, even to the likes of him, but although he did it on both sides, you see them kind of having their impact by scoring tries. And you see those big point scores. So front row, I think rather than them being a product of a good, or them being the cause of a good team, they're a product of a good team. Now,
Yep.
when I look at the center position, here is where I see it the other way around. I see center position is I am no longer kind of a product of a good team, but I'm causing teams to be good, right? You think about the two teams in the finals.
Right.
We have Wayne Vanderbank, Ben Lesage, LaRue Millen. We have Dan Creel, Tavit Lopetti, Devon Rousseau. You think about those two teams and how impactful those players had. Wayne Vanderbank gave them front football. That is a game changer for a winning team. You look at a guy like Devon Rousseau and Dan Creel, defensively, offensively, front football, constantly putting them forward in with gain line. So to me, I think those two positions are probably the ones that are likely the most correlated here.
It's funny that you mentioned that because it's almost like the chicken or the egg conversation, right? Like what came first? It's like the center you're going to look at two teams or two positions in terms of the success that they had. And it's like, okay, is it the front rower that's causing that success, or is it the fantasy success, or is it the other way around that their fantasy success is causing the team success? So it's interesting that you bring up those two positions particularly, because when I broke it down, those were the two positions that had the most players in the top 10 on teams that had winning records. And what sucked was that I couldn't include Dallas. I think this is where we'll get into a separate conversation here, where the product of how a team plays goes into the fantasy value as well, because Dallas played such an electric and fun and exciting game style that there was a lot of fantasy in there. But I had to keep a partial line there, and I just chose teams that had a winning record. So that would be Houston with 14-2, Seattle 11-5, San Diego 11-5, New England 11-5, Nola Gold 10-6, and Chicago 8-7-1.
Fair enough.
I took those lines, and for the front row and the center position, both 5 out of the top 10 players, the most percentage of any position in fantasy MLR, had those portion of players on winning teams. Now, I guess to your point, what you're saying here is that that's not surprising to you, but not surprising in two different ways. The front row being that because they are on a good team, they're fantasy productive, right?
Yeah.
But for the center position, because these guys are fantasy productive, they're making their teams good. So then can I then extrapolate that out and assume, and saying this, and you correct me if I'm wrong in your ideology there, that when you're entering a fantasy MLR draft, you're not as concerned on what team a center plays for, and you think that the team that they play for has much less impact on their fantasy value, and they're going to bring that fantasy value whether they're on a good team or bad team. And in fact, that good fantasy value is probably going to make that team a good team, versus a front row position where you're much heavily looking at a front row player playing on a solid offensive team.
Yeah. I mean, look, if it came down to it on the front row, in the front row position, if I had a guy who, let's say Andrew Quattrin, right, scores 122.9 points, and I had a guy who is on Miami or LARFC who scored the exact same 122.9 points last season, who am I going to take? I'm going to take Quattrin because he has the higher potential and the higher floor to do well because of the team he's on. So yeah, I would agree with the statement there. I would caveat all of this by saying that there are I don't necessarily believe that outside of the front row position, I don't necessarily believe that good teams make good fantasy players. Right?
Yeah.
Like I don't fully I just don't think I think there's to me, and as you go through some of the rest of these positions, right, I think it's going to show a bit more. To me,
Mhm.
it's so much a product of the style of play.
Yes. Yes.
Everything's the style of play.
And that's where we'll get into the second part, is that there were so many Dallas Jackals, right? That
Yeah.
were in these top tens, right? And they're not being included because obviously they finished with a 6-10 record. But I think we can all say in the 2024 season, they were the most electric offense to watch this past year,
Let me
right?
yeah,
You
and
can even throw in the anthem in there, right? 0-16, obviously on paper, just not a good team when it comes to results. But from a fantasy standpoint, they had a fast and moving offense. You can throw RFC LA in there, right? You can even go the counterpoint where the Houston
well, I was
SaberCats
going to say
almost go,
let me lay that out. Like
yeah,
Houston SaberCats go almost undefeated.
right,
You look at the back three and you look at the top, you look at the back three, which by the way, you think, hey, back three, these guys are going to reap the benefits of a good
right,
team. I think in the top 20, only Davey Kutzer.
right,
That's it. And
right,
you look at everybody and think about it. You think back to the season, there was no every Houston back three player was a streamer. I needed a back three guy. I'm gonna pick him up.
right.
Like it was yeah, that's where the most glaring factor of like it's really style of play, and we know from watching and we know from players saying that they play a boring style of rugby in the
Right.
forwards. Their back three and their backs just aren't going to get the ball, and there was no need for them to ever really get fantasy points, and that's how they won.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you. It was just very interesting.
The one thing
Interesting
I
to,
will say, Rye,
right.
is what puts us apart from a lot of the other fantasy sports, and I'll maybe compare to fantasy football the most, is that defensively, you can get a lot of points defensively. Look at a
Hmm.
guy like Corey Daniel, like we had Jam
Right.
Delay, right? James Dealey talking about MLR stats, home of North American Rugby Database. Uh, he comes on and says Corey Daniel's a guy that you have to look at because he's a guy that racks up tackles. In Old Glory DC, they were a mediocre team.
Hmm.
They didn't have a winning record.
Right.
Um, but Corey Daniel will rack up points for you every week, and
And
he will
that,
give you tackles every week, and that makes the fantasy MLR so much different.
right,
And
right,
why,
right.
like, you can be on the anthem and put up a dumb amount of points, like a Jake Turnbull in the front row, even though
Sure.
he's not even a hooker,
Right, right,
right?
right.
He's still able to put up a good amount of points for his team because defensively he's able to contribute, and he's forced to contribute because of them being a bad team.
It's almost it's almost like it's vice versa. And it's almost like backwards thinking, right? Because yes, in all fantasy sports, we're so offensive driven, right?
Yeah.
Like everything is offense, 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 right? Obviously, maybe if you play in a fantasy football league, I'm crazy enough to be in one where we have IDP players, individual
It's done.
defensive players, which is crazy. But when I look at the back row, 2 out of 10 of the top 10 in the back row position were on winning record teams. You can almost assume or extrapolate that out. Back row position is a position that is tackling a lot. If you don't have the ball, you're tackling. You could assume, and that's where the back row position is getting a lot of their points, breakdown steals, things like that. You got to not have the ball to get those stats. So
Yeah.
it does make fantasy MLR very unique. So I think the point being here, to kind of wrap this up with a bow, is that I think there's going to be a tendency with fantasy MLR managers who have played other fantasy sports in before to see value or to naturally assume that being on a good team means good fantasy production. But what makes fantasy MLR unique and what Maddie is saying here is that you got to dive that extra layer, and you got to not just look at how a team is doing on paper from a record standpoint, but you got to watch these games and you got to figure out how these teams are playing, because you'll find a Dallas Jackals, you'll find an Anthem that play fast and a quick style of rugby that lends itself to fantasy MLR. That's what you're going to have to do, and that would be, I guess, out of this episode, the interesting tidbit. We talk about sticky notes on this show all the time, Maddie. About how did JJ Toltz win our inaugural fantasy MLR season? He took sticky notes, and Maddie took his advice and ended up being on the jersey the next season.
Yeah.
In terms of just trying to learn and figure out this game that is fantasy MLR, and that's something we've learned over the course of the 4 or 5 years. Is that yeah, game style plays a huge impact, not necessarily how good a team is record wise.
And I'll add that game style as well as player tendencies.
Yes.
Like you have to look at it's not the team is not going to make an AJ Alatimu suddenly a runner of the ball, a guy who takes the ball to the line. AJ Alatimu will always be a distributor and a guy who's going to get you a lot of points off the tee.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of a guy that comes to mind is like Richard Judd, when he was playing the Legion, getting involved in the hitting.
Like Tupai, like you're going to have a Tupai who's going to be a player style that is just going to score tries. You're going to have an Andre Warner who is going to make tackles. And you're going to have guys like, I'm trying to think, like, I don't know, a guy like, I'm not even sure, but like for example, like Lucas Rumble, right? When he was playing for the Arrows. I'll say Luke Campbell, guy like Luke Campbell who just is doing things at the 9 position that isn't fantasy relevant per se. But guys like Tupai and guys like Andre Warner are. Right. So you really have to look at, I don't think it matters so much of the team outside of the front row. I think it really matters here of the player, the team's play style, and then obviously we always talk about this, Ryan, opportunity. What does that look like for him? Yeah. Yeah. We just kind of trying to map the web that is fantasy MLR. There are a lot of factors that go into a successful fantasy team build when it comes to Major League Rugby. But interesting to say the least. I think this is getting me pretty excited to start getting rosters going and start looking at stuff. I was thinking, Ryan, I don't know, people listening in our league should probably watch out because I'm about to get into I'm probably going to the dungeon and just start watching the entire NPC Bunnings Cup season. There you go. I'm going to watch all of it. I'm going to watch every MLR player and take notes on everyone. And anyone that gets signed, I'm going to know exactly what they're going to do in the league. Yeah. And you're not going to put one past me. Yep. And you're not going to share that with me because now I play against you. So that's and I did call Michael Manson last year. So that is true. I'll give you that. But hey, definitely an interesting conversation. Again, this is something that we are going to incorporate when we come out with our rankings, when we have our yearly top 5 episodes, top 5 player at each position episodes closer to the start of the season. But just an interesting tidbit that kind of came up this past week as we asked ourselves that question, as New England Free Jacks is a team that looks to be good, but does that necessarily mean that a lot of their players are going to be fantasy relevant? It's to be determined in terms of those factors that we just talked about. All right, let's get into our last segment, Maddie. Don't have Vandy here, but we're doing our best to kind of move on here. Still Degenerates. And we definitely we're digging into some interesting picks last week, to say the least. But hey, it is fine for Triple D, Devin's Degenerate Dambles, brought to you by Betstamp. Betstamp betting made easy. We've partnered with Betstamp for the TFR betting challenge, where Vandy and I are going head to head in terms of who can make the most money when it comes to betting on rugby. You can join in on the fun. Betstamp has given our listeners and viewers and our supporters a fun little opportunity to go down below, click the link, signupexpert.com/thefantasyruckers to take advantage of sportsbooks that are in your area with some first-time user deals. You'll be able to discover some sports books that you didn't even realize were operating and legal in your area. So check that out, and you'll be able to get some good deals to get some free bets there, which is a lot of fun. And when it came to what Maddie was going to say there, when it comes to our TFR betting challenge and who's making money, it is head to foot. Yeah, it's pretty lopsided right now. I am in the gutter. And I wouldn't have been so much in the gutter if I had pulled the trigger. If you listen to me. No, I don't want you to do that because you left me on red. Left me on red. But I had a good reason. One, I was locked on the Wellington win. I knew they were going to win. Up the lines, they won. Okay. Money line. I said, don't do spread. It's a final. It's going to be closer than 4.5 points. And I told you that's what happened. They won by 3. Actually, extra time, Ryan. Golden goal. Yeah. Penalty kick. They finished it off. Okay, they won. And then the Harlequins, look, this is what happened for the people. Ryan was telling me, hey, should I pull this trigger? I was like, yeah, I think this looks good. Hold on, let me check the lineup. I looked the lineup. Harlequins, all their guys are getting ready for the Autumn International Series, which we'll get into for England. And it looked like the Exeter lineup had a guy like Henry Slade in there, and I was getting a bit nervous. I said, I don't know how this is going to look. So I will admit, yes, I left you on red, but this is bring back my underdog mentality. It's back because I nailed that underdog.
We got to think less when it comes to these picks. So
exactly.
yes, I had the parlay.
Don't think, just do. Just like
I
Maverick
had the
said.
parlay sitting in my checkout. It was the money line for Wellington. It was the 7-point spread for the Harlequins. And it was going to be almost triple my money, and it smashed, and I didn't hit the spend button.
Anyways, this week, Ryan, we got Autumn International Series week 1, baby.
Yeah, so we're going to stick with that, and we're going to see whether or not we can take advantage of Vandy.
And we're staying away from Prems. We're staying away from Premiership. As long as England isn't, we're staying away from that.
All right. So all international this go around. We'll see whether or not we can take advantage of Vandy being out here and see whether or not we can make some money here on the first week of Autumn International Test Series. So I'm gonna bring up the odds, Matt. We were just talking about it off the air in the 2 matches that we have. We got New Zealand taking on England, and then we have Fiji taking on Scotland.
Can I interrupt you, Ryan? Yes. I just realized that Murray Field is now called Scottish Gas Murray Field Stadium, and that's one of the best names for stadium.
That is pretty cool. Okay.
All right. Anyways,
let's start with the one that probably people are not as excited about, but Scotland Fiji. All right, let's start with that one. Saturday, 1:40 p.m. Eastern time. What do you think the spread is when it comes to the Scotland versus Fiji?
Assuming Finn Russell is, I'm going to say 7 points? No, 10. 10 points. 10 Fiji's 14 point dogs.
14. 17.5 is the spread.
Okay.
17.5 underdogs there. The money line is plus 650. Ooh, does that entice you at all?
I like Fiji spread there. I like them covering.
Okay, you like them covering. Okay, so 17, you think they'll lose by less than 17.5. All right, we'll mark that in the books. Yeah, there's no doubt that is there any way that Fiji wins this one?
I don't think so. Well, no, I mean, look, it's Fiji. It's Fiji. Fiji has pulled things out of the hat. They beat Wales before. But Scotland is I think in a better place than Wales was then. But Fiji just pulls things out of the hat. They're just a class side. So I don't think they'll win. I think they could do it. I don't think they'll win, but I think they cover the spread of 17.5.
All right. 17.5 points is the spread. Maddie picks Fiji in that spread with a line of minus 115 on Bet Rivers. Make sure to check your sport book if you have the same lines there. All right. Then we'll go to the kind of the marquee matchup over the weekend here. England taking on New Zealand. What is the spread here, Maddie?
It's got to be England favored by 3.
England favored by 3 is the pick. It is New Zealand favored by 2.5.
Okay, that was close. It's close. Oof. Oh. I don't like that spread.
Yeah, it's the tough one. 2.5. England are the plus 130 underdogs.
Basically a money line.
It's basically a pick 'em. I mean, if you like England though, you can go with the plus 130. You get way better odds. Is there anything that is enticing there for you?
I mean, New Zealand just doesn't look like, even in the second half of the game against Japan. Yeah, they scored a bunch of tries, but they didn't look great. Mind you, Damon McKenzie didn't have a great game. Roygaard didn't play as much as he probably would have. They didn't have their top guys out there. I'm biased, but I like New Zealand still in this. I do like New Zealand. But I definitely think there's a possibility that England takes the win here.
All right. So is there anything that you're parlaying this weekend? That's the question.
I
Because
mean,
we're at
hey, if
that
you're,
point. Vandy has $38.02 in his payroll. I got $3.86 left. We gotta hit something here, Maddie.
I mean, Ryan, I don't know what, like, I feel like you can go two ways. You just like small increments and you just build your money back up with small increments every week, right? You take things like, France versus Japan, you take a Scotland versus Fiji, you take an Italy versus Argentina, actually an Argentina over Italy. Um, I don't know, Ryan. I don't know if you want to lose your money lose your money on an
Scotland
England
versus
versus
Fiji.
New Zealand.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can't even call that. That's too close to call.
All right. But you
I
like
don't
do
I
like
would
you do like
I
the
would I
17 and a
would
half though.
personally stay away from the England New Zealand
Okay.
just because I don't know. You're ultimately just doing a pick 'em.
Yeah. It's scary.
Every game they play is close
It is scary.
most times. Yeah, I think Fiji can cover.
All right.
If you want to go
17.
risky, I would go Fiji covers. If you want to go, hey, let's make 50 cents here. Scotland beats Fiji. Money line.
No, that's not Matt. That you won't even get
You make
anything.
10 cents.
You'll make it's 7 cents by betting a
You,
dollar.
if you make 7 cents, guess what? By week
No, we're not
4,
that
you got 40 cents.
that's the epitome of degenerate gambling right there. But all right, we're gonna have to ponder the Fiji Scotland match. That'll be an interesting one at Scottish
Those,
Gas Murrayfield Stadium, which is
you've got that Scottish gas.
which is interesting. All right. Well, hey,
Ryan, fun tip for you. Murrayfield has the largest end zones out of all international stadiums.
all right. That means I'm picking Fiji to win it outright. The speed there is they're gonna use those end zones.
Nope, I don't think that's how it works. I think you usually put high balls and grubbers at the back. But yes,
uh, we'll see. We'll see.
Fijian Flair will be fun to watch. That's
This
for
has
sure.
really got me down though. Like I got to pick it up here. I got to pick it up.
Well,
Anyways,
Ryan, hey, if you have it for yours, I know we said we're not betting Premiership.
yeah,
I
okay.
mean,
All
I
right.
know we don't have it, but I'm just saying, Newcastle still exists. Just putting that out there.
Just putting that out there. When in
Newcastle
doubt,
Falcons still
when
exist.
in doubt, bet against Newcastle.
Yeah,
Did they lose? They lost again.
I'm pretty sure they lost.
Yeah.
Just like
All right.
Exeter, them and Exeter just sitting at the bottom of the table.
All right. Well, maybe it's just to start parlaying anyone who's facing Exeter and Newcastle. That might be the strategy moving forward. But anyways, that is
Maybe we gotta
our
do some overs.
yeah, our fan yeah. Well, I mean, okay. I mean, there's okay, hold on. So before we wrap this up, let's see. Hold on.
Ruh-roh.
Let me
Do some
see.
over for Scotland, Fiji.
You want I think they might have that. Game props. Uh oh, you should see some of these game props. That is
What is it,
spicy.
Ryan? Give me a game prop.
Uh
Give me one of them.
like who wins? Does England win both halves? New Zealand win both halves? First team to score, first try, first try to be converted.
Wow. Yeah, I'm
There's
not good enough for
there's no
that.
players there though.
This isn't the
Most
Super Bowl.
popular. Yeah. I'm trying to think. Is there? I can't find it right now. I do not.
Anyways,
I don't know. Anyways,
it's gonna be some good games this weekend. Make
yeah,
sure to watch.
yeah. International Test Series. It's a good time. Very good time. Anyway, so that is Triple D, Devin, Degenerate, Dambles, brought to you by Betstamp. Betstamp being made easy. Click that link down below. Signupexpert.com/fantasy Ruckers for sportsbooks
And we see so many
and
mustaches this
user
weekend.
deals. And that's true. New user deals in sportsbooks in your area, and it helps out support the show as well, which is always a good thing. Yeah, interesting episode. We dove into a little bit of fantasy MLR, dove into a little bit of sport rugby betting. Can't get any better than that, and it's definitely getting us more and more excited. I cannot wait. Doing this, let me tell you, doing this Triple D segment. And knowing that when MLR rolls around, that we're going to be placing some crazy, crazy bets on some MLR matches that are happening, it's going to be a whole lot of fun.
We're
But
gonna take advantage of some lines here.
yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. All right, Maddie. Anything else you have for the people?
Just up the Lions.
Up the Lions. That's all he's got to say. All right. For Matt Yee, for Devin Vandy Vanderpool, I am Ryan Yee, and we'll be back with another episode of the Fantasy Ruckers Show.
Judge stinks.
You've been listening to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, covering everything rugby from the MLR and beyond. We hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and be sure to tell all your friends. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, connect with us on social media at the Fantasy Ruckers. Till next time, this is the Fantasy Ruckers Show, signing off.